So on the way over here today, I was thinking about that great work by Longfellow, the Ode to Life. Lives of great men all remind us, from the greatest to the least, if you lust for socialism, come and hear our Catholic priest. It was something like that. It's my privilege not only to serve on the board of Acton, but to serve with Father Robert. And in that capacity, not only to admire his work and his insights and his intellect from a distance, but also to get to know him personally and to profit from that friendship. His bio is in front of you. It's long and it's impressive. I won't go through that to save time and to have as much time possible for his teaching us and for response to it. I'd like you to welcome Father Robert Sirico.
Well, I'm so glad. I think this is the season to be talking about social justice, and I want to thank Glenn Beck for that. I actually had this all prepared, and those of you who know the work of the Acton Institute know that we deal with these questions all the time, but it seems like Mr. Beck has really stirred the pot on this issue, and across the country where I've been speaking on this title, we've had great crowds, very enthusiastic, and I think the whole mood of the country now really brings to the fore some of these questions, some of these intersections. It's not enough for us to have a right economic understanding if we don't have a right moral understanding. And it's not enough for us to simply have a right religious sensibility if we don't know what to do with that and put it into practice. And so the combination of these two ideas is imperative. And very often people get rather confused about what we're talking about. This was illustrated for me many, many years ago when I studied in England. I studied at the University of London. And I had an opportunity to study in a variety of places because I was doing one of these junior years abroad kind of programs. And I decided to go to England because I thought, well, we have the same language, so I don't have to spend a lot of time getting up to speed on the language. And I loved the poets, Longfellow's. I remember that poem that you alluded to. I had it memorized. He's got a few on Protestant pastors as well. And so I went to England and satisfied that we'd be able to communicate easily, I'd be able to learn a lot. So I met an English fellow in the dorm, which they call the hostel. Is this an angry place? No. It's called a hostel. And so I met him, and he said, well, why don't you come out tonight? We've got some friends, some blokes, and we're going to go out and go to the pub. And so I said, well, okay, that sounds great. So we went out to the pub. And we sat down, and there were probably 8 or 9 of us in this group, all chatting away. And as we sat in a kind of semicircle, the young lady came to take our orders. And she never wrote a word down. She just went down the list, and each person ordered a different ale, or brew, or beer, or whatever, lager, all these different things. And she just listened to each one, and she said, okay, and then she went, and she came back a little while later with this huge tray of pints of ale and half pints and all of this, and she proceeded, without asking a word, to place the right order in front of the right bloke. And when she was done with this, I was amazed at this professionalism. And so I said to her, I said, "You're a real pro, aren't you?" And everyone fell silent. The woman glared at me. And I turned to my friend, my British friend, and I said, "I know that I've just done something terrible, but I haven't a clue what it is." He said, "Oh, you just call the young lady a prostitute." It's amazing how we can speak the same language and mean something completely different. And I have a hunch that something like this is going on with this use of the word social justice. And not just the word social justice, but a lot of words that are clustered around the notion of social justice, or the common good, or human rights, or the responsibility of society, indeed, who the human person is. Because we use the same words, but we mean very different things. And sometimes those things aren't very important. I mean, a bloke. You can pick that up pretty easily. It's not, doesn't set everything on a whole different trajectory. But sometimes when you get small things wrong, you end up with very, very big things wrong as well. And so what I'd like to do is begin by clarifying some of what we mean, but I'm not going to begin just with the notion of social justice. We could have answered that question. Does social justice require socialism? And then sent you all home. And I have a hunch that's not why you're here. It's not just to kind of get an answer to a question, a simple answer to a question. It's not just to be told what to think, but to be enabled as to how to think about these kinds of issues. And I think it's very important, and we have to begin at the beginning. We need to clarify some of the confusions that we have, and let's begin with the assumptions that we have about the human person. Because if we don't get that right, we're not going to get anything that we build upon that foundation right. If we don't understand who we are as human beings, and I hope that what I'll offer will be a broad enough concept, a reasonable enough concept, an accessible enough concept to all of us that will span beyond our differences of denomination or theological approaches, and even perhaps bring in some of those who are not believers yet. That is to say, to define this in such a way that it is reasonable and compelling, that all people of goodwill can have a certain accessibility to the argument and to the premises that we're offering. Because I don't think that people who are not believers necessarily have bad intentions. And I think there are some people who have a lot of belief who have a lot of bad intentions. So let's begin with who the human person is as we think about ourselves and our reality. The most obvious thing about us is our physicality. It's the thing we first notice. It's the thing that people sell various kinds of products based upon. How you're going to look, how other people are going to perceive you if they look at you, if you're wearing this kind of makeup or this kind of shirt or driving this kind of car. The physical is the most obvious representation of who we are. But I think all of us know deep down, maybe sometimes at night when we're all alone in those quiet moments, even if we don't profess a belief in God, we know that that doesn't quite exhaust the definition of who we are. That our physicality is a reality, but it's not the whole reality of who we are. That anytime we love, anytime we stand before a work of art with a sense of awe, anytime we hear a certain piece of music that inspires us, that particular piece of music that creates this sense of exaltation within us, all of those things point to something more than our physicality in us as part of our nature. The love of poetry, particularly the love between two people where precisely the experience is had where the more you give yourself away, the more you discover who you are. All of these are indications of the nature of transcendence in each human being. I think the biblical accounts give us a fuller explanation of that reality, but it's sufficient from reason to understand that a physical definition, a material or corporeal definition of who we are as human beings does not exhaust who human beings are. That's why it's very important to understand that even though you get hit with a plethora of facts sometimes, not to confuse the facts with the meaning behind the facts. What we're seeking isn't just data. What we're seeking in our lives is transcendent meaning. Why do we exist? And what do we do with this existence of ours? So in this sense, we're different from animals. Animals have corporality. But animals don't relate to the material world in a transcendent way. They relate to the material world based on instinct. Human beings relate to the material world based on the use of our minds, on the basis of reason. And so that we transcend animals in this regard. And just as a parenthetical remark, I should say, I might have said this in a previous lecture, I think it's all very important to understand that respectful treatment of animals is not based upon an intrinsic dignity of the animal. It is based upon the intrinsic dignity of the human being. And we've lost this sense of humane treatment of animals, that it's our dignity that's at risk when we abuse an animal. There's just a thought to kind of think about who we are. So our reality, in the first instance, is physical and spiritual. There's another dimension to who we are as well, simultaneous. The most obvious, maybe not the most obvious, but certainly very obvious, is that we are individual. In a sense, we are autonomous. And we are, from the first moment of our existence, physiologically, biologically, autonomous. And yet, at that same moment, we are in relation. So we are individual and we are social. Simultaneously, that's who we are. The person who denies their social reality, either consciously denies it or because of some kind of traumatic experience, does not attend or is not aware of or does not have any reference to their social reality, is called a sociopath, right? The person who is the real radical individualist, who can be very manipulative, but who has no real affection or love. Any form of affection or love for the true sociopath is a person who is just manipulated. They react in a way that tries to get you to react back for their own sake, not because of affinity, not because of the love. Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have the real collectivist. That is the person who has no sense of esteem, has no sense of distinguishing features of himself from other people. It's the tendency in the kid who's following the crowd, who mom always says, if they told you to jump off a building, would you do it? You know, that kind of thing. There's a very memorable movie that I enjoyed years ago called Zillig by Woody Allen. I don't know if you ever got to see it, but if you're looking for a movie to see, it's a very intriguing movie. It's all shot in black and white, and it's the story of this character, Zillig, played by this wimpy little Woody Allen. Well, what else? But, right? Nimish, I think they say it, Nimish. They find out, and it's presented as though it's a documentary, and they find out, these investigators find out that there is this human chameleon that they hadn't known existed. And he's existed for a long time. But because he's a chameleon, he blends into the background of every social circumstance that he's in. But they think they've discovered him. And first, there's the archival proof on film. And so they begin to show you these old sepia-toned newsreels. And one of them is, and they're very familiar images. There's one of Hitler's speech before some big congress, I don't know where, Nuremberg or something. and it's Hitler ranting and raving, and the SS is flanking him, and the crowds are cheering. And as you watch this very familiar image, your eye kind of goes a little bit to the side, and you see, sitting in the front row among the SS officers, dressed in an SS uniform, is Zillig, little Woody Allen. And then there's another big scene of Pope Pius XII, I believe it was, coming onto the balcony to give the Urbi et Orbi blessing to the city and the world. And he's standing there before the throngs at St. Peter's Basilica, and he's gesturing to people, and you notice a little commotion over on the side. And they have discovered this man pretending to be a Franciscan monk, and they're dragging him off. And it's Zillig. It's Woody Allen. And then finally they confront Zillig. And the psychiatrist, kind of looking for all the world like Sigmund Freud, is sitting there, you know, with beard and with his legs crossed, in this kind of counseling posture. Pretty soon you see the Zillig character begin to form into and so he blends in. That's the collectivist. That's the person who's forgotten his individuality. That's the person who is the first to capitulate in the face of great evil in society and just kind of get on the bandwagon, go along, gets along. Now, obviously, these are caricatures on either end, but they speak a truth about a tendency. And the human person is, by his and her nature, a combination of these two factors. So we've got four simultaneous realities that constitute the human reality. We are corporeal and transcendent. We are social and we are individual. All of this together. Now, I say all of this, I've taken this time to elaborate this because unless we recognize this fundamental ground upon which all society is erected, anything we build on top of it will go wrong, including institutions of politics, institutions of religion, economics, and our understanding of how the world works, and that brings us to questions of politics and social relationships. The question of social justice, must it be socialism? I think that socialism is an aberration. Now, it's a truth. That is, it refers to the truth of the necessity of social relationships and social obligations. But it's a truth, to allude to Chesterton, that has gone mad. It's taken a truth and run with it to the exclusion of other truths of who the human person is. Now, it is true, and to this extent I agree with Glenn Beck, that very often when the term social justice is used, it is used in the context of smuggling in a meaning that need not be part of its appropriate definition. That is to say, social justice very often means socialist justice, which is an oxymoron, but we'll get to that. But I don't think it's necessarily the case. And I don't think historically, intellectually, philosophically, and theologically it is the case at all that what social justice calls for is a form of coercive socialism. I think a lot of this has to do with a certain confusion about the role of government in society and about the understanding and the distinction between social responsibilities and political responsibilities. We very often will use the phrase, this is another set of confusions, we often use the phrase, well, society has an obligation to do X, Y, and Z. And we've just seen this in the whole healthcare debate. We have a social obligation to help those who do not have access or do not have medical care. And that, because of the ambiguity of the definitions being employed, allows people to smuggle in a lot of different ideas to say that it's not just a social obligation. What they mean is there's a political obligation, that there is an obligation in law that each one of us must do something, must have money taken away from us to support various things. And I think that is a mistake. I'm not talking now about the healthcare thing, but talking about the concept is a mistake. That social obligation is not necessarily political obligation because society is not necessarily politics. Just think about that for a moment. When a political structure is overthrown, you still have the society, right? When the Soviet Union collapsed as a political structure, you still have the Russian society. Now, it may have been formed by the politics, and sometimes the politics even forms the society. Those are separate questions. But the important thing for us to keep our eye on is the distinction between politics and society. Society is that set of people, that gathering of people that agree on a certain set of norms or traditions, have a certain similar history, very often the same language. Politics is a different thing. Politics is about demarcating the role of government in society, the rule of law, and those obligations which can be mandated upon people who are citizens of that given polis, that society, political reality. And I think perhaps that confusion is the result of an even more fundamental confusion, which has to do with the distinction between power and authority. Now, here I'm drawing on Robert Nisbet's writing in his book, Quest for Community, where he says that there is a distinction between authority and power. Both authority and power are forms of constraint. But authority is a form of constraint that is internal to the person, and power is a form of constraint that is external to the person. Okay? Power has no necessary reference point to your choice or your will. Power can be inflicted upon you to conform your behavior to what the origin, the author of that power wants. Authority is a very different thing. Authority is voluntary. It can constrain your behavior even when you would prefer not to do what the authority is asking you to do. But something in you acquiesces to that authority because you buy the fundamental legitimacy of that authority. Example. Guy gets up on Saturday morning, preparing his golf clubs for a wonderful day, perhaps like this, out on the course. His wife walks into the kitchen, sees him with the golf clubs, and looks at him. He, like I did in England those years ago, knew that he's done something wrong, but isn't quite sure what it is. He says, "What's up, honey?" And she says, "Did you forget that today is my sister's wedding?" Now, there's nothing more in the world this man wants than to go on that golf course. But he will walk upstairs and put his tuxedo on. Not because his wife has a frying pan in her hand, but because of this mutual submission of one to the other in the covenant of marriage. That's the authority of marriage. And you see that kind of authority in so many, many ways that we don't even think about it. When a man stands back and lets a lady walk through the door first, that's authority being exercised. It's a certain tradition, a certain norm, a certain etiquette that we share. When we know the rules of this etiquette, we are more comfortable. Now, we may not, we'd like to eat our salad with a big fork, but we know, because Mom's taught us, we eat it with a small fork. We conform our behavior based on authority, sometimes rather unimportant and superficial, and sometimes very important and very critical. Now, power is not of that sort. Power will constrain your behavior physically. And what power can't do is change our minds. Power can conform our bodies, but it can't convert our minds. So if we have these distinctions in mind, when we come to the question of does social justice require socialism, we have to say no, and in point of fact, social justice will repudiate socialism. Why do I say that? Because the essential error of socialism is an anthropological error. That is, it does not take full account of who the human person is. Socialism treats the human person as a cog in a wheel. And whatever it constructs in the name of, and there's that other phrase, the common good, it's a misunderstanding. The common good always has to have reference to the good of the individual, or it's not really the common good. By hacking off part of the commons, so to speak, the commune, you haven't promoted the common good. So when socialism disregards the good of the person in his physicality and transcendence, in his individual and social relationships, when socialism and more modern socialism, materialistic socialism, only tends to the social and the physical dimension of the human person, to the extent that socialism does this, socialism does not promote an authentic understanding of social justice. Justice, according to Aristotle and Aquinas and the great thinkers, is treatment in accord with desert. That we treat people as they deserve to be treated. And human beings do not deserve to be treated as though they did not have reference to themselves, as though they were not the first to generate their own good. Our first responsibility is to act to the best knowledge that we have for the benefit of ourselves and for those who are dearest to us. So in answer to the question that does social justice require socialism, we have to say no, and it cannot. Because an authentic understanding of social justice has to have a sane, balanced, and authentic understanding of who human beings are as individuals and in their relationship with other individuals. It is a common misnomer of the collectivist idea that somehow we can ennoble others by coercing them, or that we can be ennobled by coercing others. And if you just think about that, you think about what that whole idea does to the notion of virtue, to the notion of good in a moral sense, to the notion of heroism. Heroes are not accidental. Heroes are such because they act in a way that is intentional. Morality is not accidental. Morality, if it is morality, has to be chosen. To be a virtuous person is to take a good action over and over and over again, to be habituated to the good by virtue of your choice. If we leave out human choice in attempting to construct a virtuous society, a just society, a good society, then we simply are left with incoherence. Because there is no such thing as the good that is not volitional, that is in a moral sense. There is an absolute good who exists regardless of our will. But in terms of us, we have to choose. And that choice is not always easy. It requires of us a certain determination and a certain habituation. And that determination, that is the will to do the good, and that habituation, that is the repetition of that, and the things that encourage that, which has to do with society reinforcing these values, these are the things that form a civilization and a society that can better approximate justice for all and the common good for all. Now let me just close with one cautionary note, because when we talk about these ideas of the common good or social justice, we tend to get kind of foggy and starry-eyed and want to build utopias. Remember what utopia means? Doesn't exist. That's what utopia is. Doesn't exist. That's the whole irony of utopia. What I'm saying is, there is no perfectly just society. There never will be. There is no society where the common good is fixed and achieved. There's never going to be a point in our history, with all our labor, with all our working, that we will say, here is the common good. Here it is. Look at it. Examine it. Through all of our endeavors, we will never be able to bring the kingdom of God down to earth. That cannot be done. There will always be measures of injustice, of depravity, of inequality, of deprivation, and sorrow and suffering on the part of human beings. The common good, the state of social justice are benchmarks. They are ideals that judge the circumstances under which we live. To accept the reality of having the poor with us at all times does not endorse any kind of complacency in the face of it. To accept the reality of human limitation or deprivation does not justify creating structures and policies and systems and institutions, much less politics, that ensure we end up having more deprivation and more poor. If we are going to build a society worthy of the human person, we have to begin by understanding who the human person is in all of his dimensions. The physical, the spiritual, the social, and the individual. And it is only in that way that we can proceed toward building a society that is worthy of man, that is just, that is free, and that approximates and moves toward a society of justice and of the common good. Thank you very much for your attention.